Hi, this is Heidi Burgess, and today I'd like to talk about Chip Hauss's book, Security 2.0, where he talks about a concept that he calls the new paradigm. Here's a picture of Chip, who's the Senior Fellow for Innovation at the Alliance for Peacebuilding. That's a great title for him because he's one of the most innovative and creative people we know. And the picture of the book shows that the subtitle is Dealing with Global Wicked Problems, a concept that's very similar to our intractable conflicts. He starts out the book by saying that we need to broaden the way we define security to such a degree that we have to rethink the way we govern ourselves in general. He focuses on security because he is an international relations scholar by training, and he's been studying security in the original sense of national security for a long time. But he, like many others, have come to realize that that's too narrow a definition of security. And while many others have come up with the notion of human security, Chip goes even more broadly than that with his concept of Security 2.0, which really is what he refers to as a security ecosystem, taking into account many, many different aspects of both human and national security, and forming part of what he calls his new paradigm. A second key aspect of his approach to these problems is his definition of wicked problem. This is an idea that's been around for a while, but there's not a whole lot of agreement on what it means. The definition that he fixes on is a problem whose causes and consequences are so inextricably intertwined that you can't understand them, let alone cope with them separately. If you're going to deal with wicked problems, you need to deal with them in new ways, and he spends quite a bit of time in the book comparing what he refers to as the old paradigm, or the way that we have typically dealt with problems, public problems, social problems, economic problems, environmental problems, conflicts, and what he calls his new paradigm. I have a number of slides here that have side-by-side comparisons of the difference. First off, the old paradigm assumes that problems are linear, which means that they have simple cause and effect linkages. They're framed in terms of good guys and bad guys and right and wrong. Another assumption is that they can be broken down into integral parts so that you can deal with problems one part at a time, and over time you will be able to solve the whole thing. Well, as was clear from the previous slide, this one, a simple cause and effect model isn't nearly complex enough, because causes turn into effects, effects turn into causes, and everything interacts and changes rapidly. So in Hauss's new paradigm, problems are complex, they have multiple causes, multiple effects, and they must be addressed as a whole. They must be seen as complex networks that have lots of changing interactions, and therefore they need lots of changing responses in order to be successfully addressed. Another comparison is that the old paradigm assumes that people are rational cost-benefit calculators, and you can control them by controlling the benefits. So as long as the benefits of an action outweigh the cost, the assumption is that people will go for it. The new paradigm realizes that things aren't nearly that simple, that there's all sorts of emotional drivers of actions as well as rational ones. There's different ways of understanding reality and framing. There's many, many different factors beyond rational costs and benefits that influence decision making. A second difference is that solutions don't come from controlling benefits alone, but from cooperative action. And we'll talk more about that too in a minute. The old paradigm assumes that you can force people to do what you want through the use of power, either physical compulsion or political power. And in power theory terms, this is a power over scenario where the goal is to keep others, in other words, bad guys, out. In the new paradigm, solutions come from cooperative actions, not force. So it's much more of a power with or a power to approach where people work together to solve problems instead of trying to force your solution on them. The old paradigm seeks either or solutions. It's either going to be my way or your way, but it's not going to be both. The new paradigm seeks what Chip Hauss and Bill Urey and others call both and solutions. You put the various options together and try to come up with an idea that works for the whole. And lastly, a difference between the old paradigm and the new paradigm is the old paradigm assumes people seek their own self-interest. This is a picture of Adam Smith, whose seminal book, The Wealth of Nations, assumed or argued that when people individually sought their own self-interests, the system as a whole would balance those interests and work for the good of everybody. We've come to realize that it doesn't work out that way nearly as much as we would like. So again, we're seeking a new paradigm which seeks the good of the whole, not just of the individuals. Now, these last two slides might have reminded you of a book that I think I've talked about already, Bill Urey, Roger Fisher, and Bruce Patton's Getting to Yes. And indeed, Getting to Yes is a starting point for the new House's new paradigm, but is not enough. Because the goal of getting to yes is simply to get to an agreement in what typically is not a wicked problem, but a relatively simple problem. With wicked problems, you need to get beyond agreement. You need to get to long-term problem solving. And the problem solving needs to go on as the system changes and needs to be flexible to adapt to those new situations. What does Hauss mean by long-term problem solving? Well, it includes at least three things: empathy, reciprocity, and trust. And each of those builds upon each other, so the more of one you have, the more of the other that you can have. And he adds that empathy is brought about by listening. So instead of pushing the other out, you try to bring the other in by listening to them, developing empathy for them, understanding for their interests and needs, working together with them reciprocally to try to develop approaches that are best for everybody, which then develops trust. How do you do this? Well, one of the ways that you can do it is look for what Hauss calls positive deviance, bright spots, where people have either accidentally or on purpose done something helpful, and then you try to magnify those actions that have been helpful, replicate those actions, and help them grow into what he calls virtuous cycles. One of the things that's important to realize is that paradigms change very slowly. So you can't expect anybody to switch quickly from the old paradigm to the new paradigm. Rather, for quite a long time, the paradigms will exist together. The old paradigm is still perfectly useful and perhaps even beneficial when you're talking about problem solving in top-down organizations, hierarchically organized organizations, when the task is well defined, when there's a solution that is possible. This is what Wendell Jones and Guy and I refer to as complicated systems, which I think I referred to in one of my earlier videos, and Guy will be talking about in depth next week. On the other hand, when you have complex and wicked problems and accelerating rates of change, you need this new paradigm, and you need what Chip refers to, lots of us do, as outside-the-box thinking. The values of the new paradigm are that our problems are shared. It's not my problem or your problem. We all have the same problems. And we need to seek the good of the whole, not just our own self-interests. And relationships are key to doing this, as is a long-term orientation. The difference between Hauss's new paradigm and getting to yes is pretty short-term. You follow the rules in the book, you get to an agreement, and that's the end of the story. The end of the story is much slower in coming with wicked problems. In fact, there may not ever be an end. But there are ways of transforming wicked problems into ones that are more manageable and more beneficial overall. And the last value of the new paradigm is power with approaches and solutions rather than power over. Actions that are typical of people who are working with the new paradigm are game-changing innovations, teamwork, trust building, which he says leads to empowerment, broad coalitions, and building what he refers to as virtuous circles, which is the term I used just a minute ago, where things are going right, and instead of having things escalate so that tensions are getting higher and higher and problems are getting worse and worse, you build virtuous circles where you solve a little bit and that helps you solve more, and you build trust and that helps you build relationships and that helps you build empathy, and so on. In order to solve wicked problems, you have to have multiple overlapping, mutually reinforcing virtuous circles. And this isn't an easy thing to do. But a start is to understand the concept and to start recognizing these virtuous circles where they occur, and then indeed trying to create them and magnify them and replicate them wherever you can. So, bottom line, when you treat our current wicked problems, such as the conflict between the right and left in the United States and all the things they're arguing over, be that inequality or immigration or healthcare or race or climate change or energy or any problem you can think of, public policy problem, now seem to be wicked problems. When you use old assumptions in the old paradigm, the result is increasingly gridlock. Nothing can get done when we define things as simple cause and effect, good guys, bad guys, working for one's own self-interest and not the self-interest of the whole, being exclusive in who you work with as opposed to inclusive. If we want to be able to get past this gridlock, we need to start using Hauss's new paradigm. He also comes up with the notion of learning organizations, which reminds me of a lot of what we just talked about with Rob Rosigliano's PAL cycle of planning, action, learning. You need to have multiple successes and multiple failures and get feedback from them in order to be able to learn how the system's changing in response to your efforts and how to change your efforts in response to the system. Very complex situation. There's lots of other very interesting ideas and many applications and examples in Security 2.0 that show how the new paradigm is beginning to be put into effect in different domains. Chip looks at the military, he looks at identity and racial conflicts, he looks at business, he looks at climate, and he looks at governance in different chapters that show how we are beginning to make the change from the old paradigm to the new paradigm, and from security 1.0 to security 2.0. But he stresses that there's no certainty that this transition is going to be successful, nor is there a roadmap for how to do it. But if we are to get beyond the gridlock that we're experiencing now, he argues, and Guy and I certainly believe, that a new way of thinking is absolutely essential. So we encourage you to check out Chip's book and look at the many similarities between that and the ideas that we'll be developing, maybe because we've talked to Chip a lot, but we've all been thinking along the same lines for quite a while. And we will develop these ideas even further in the next unit on complexity-oriented peace building. Thanks.